Welcome, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the tunes we had welcoming you. And I want to welcome you to our 19th session of the Tech and Innovation Center series, part of the Local Infrastructure Hub. As you join the Zoom and get settled in, I'll invite you to join the slew of activity in the chat. Share your name, your role, and your organization so we have a sense of who's here with us. I'll share my info. My name's Tina Walla, and I'm the Chief Partnerships Officer at U.S. Digital Response, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that provides pro bono technology support to governments. This series, the Tech and Innovation Center series, is a part of the Local Infrastructure Hub, which aims to help America's towns and cities take full advantage of federal infrastructure funding by helping to create competitive, winning bids that deliver real results for residents. The session today is brought to you by Cornell Tech and U.S. Digital Response and is supported by our funders Bloomberg Philanthropies, Ballmer Group, Emerson Collective, Ford Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation. Now, as a refresher, the Tech and Innovation Center aims to inspire local government leaders like all of you about the integration of technology that improves city infrastructure. And as you'll see on the next slide, we have 4 key values that guide this series. First, we're driven by shared goals. We don't believe in technology for technology's sake, but rather we want it to address a real problem and to make advances to address goals that are shared by many. Second, we want to design for people. We know that technology processes and products have to reflect the needs and desires of deeply diverse groups and individuals. We're not all the same. Third, we believe in approaching this work with a commitment to resourcing this work. We talk a lot in this series about, oh, we're in this moment right now where there's a lot of federal funding, and that's so fantastic. And we want to think long-term about sustainability, and that includes planning for workforce and policies and regulation. And certainly today's topic I know for a lot of us, we think about those elements as we think about generative AI in any way, right? And last but not least, we want to build for trust. Tech and innovation should deliver solutions that are transparent, secure, durable, reliable, and mindful of privacy considerations. All right, now on to today's discussion. So today we're focusing on how cities can leverage increasingly mainstream generative AI tools to assist with grant writing as all of you pursue federal funding. I'll be hearing from one of my colleagues from U.S. Digital Response about how generative AI can help communities aiming to win competitive infrastructure grants. And then we're going to do some live demos of how you can get started. I'm really excited about the live demos that we've got for you today. I hope that this can help to make these tools less intimidating and more accessible for all of you so you can start playing around with them yourselves if you haven't already done so. I'm also excited. We're also going to hear from a startup that's on the cutting edge of using AI to secure grant funding. And I think it's going to be a great window into what's possible. I also want to highlight something new we're trying today. Rather than having a hard stop at the top of the hour, we're going to stay on Zoom an extra half hour to 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 Pacific, for those who are interested in a deeper dive demo on how to use generative AI for data analysis, which we know is a key component for grant reporting. If you can't stay on, no sweat. But for those of you who do have flexibility, we hope you'll stick around. And we want to hear in that extra half hour questions that you have that we can then address. Now, before I introduce our speakers, we'd like to take a moment to ask some poll questions to get a sense of where you and your communities are with respect to this issue. So on the next slide, we're going to pop these up. Here we go. So first question, have you used AI chat tools like Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT for any work-related tasks? Second question, what are your grant writing responsibilities? Just want to get a sense of who's in the room. And then third, where do you expect AI can help the most with grant writing and reporting? Let me give you a moment to respond to that poll. I always love seeing how the active voting is changing the percentages on responses. Take a few more moments here for you. Okay. This is a nice spread in terms of all of these. Let's all take a moment just to get a sense of who else is in the virtual room with us. Looks like there's a lot of spread in terms of the extent to which we're all using these tools for work tasks. We've got a mix when it comes to what your individual grant writing responsibilities are. And I see over half of you see AI can help with reducing the labor involved in proposal preparation. And today's webinar is going to speak to use cases in that very regard. So this is really, this is great. I think we'll have a great discussion. Now, I'm excited to introduce our speakers for today. Joining us for today's session are Perry Sabatee, Senior Advisor for U.S. Digital Responses Grants Program, Anthony Townsend, Senior Research Associate at the Urban Tech Hub at Cornell Tech, and Helena Merck, co-founder and CEO of Streamline Climate. Now, Perry, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to invite you to ground us in some context, use cases, and your advice based on your experience as a government executive. Perry, over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I titled this Using AI to Win because I think in the current grant writing market, there's so many competitive grants out there that one reason why we want to use AI is, just as the poll showed, to help us in prepping our proposals so we have enough time to put that extra edge on to win. So let's go to the next slide. As Tina mentioned, I'm Perry Sabatee. I'm the Senior Advisor for Grants at U.S. Digital Response. And I do want to thank Anthony Townsend and Jamie Lavin and Tina and everybody else at the local infrastructure hub for allowing me to share some thoughts from two programs inside U.S. Digital Response. Our digital delivery program provides pro bono technical support to create public sector Gen I experiments and tools to improve service delivery. And our grants program, which I'm part of, has worked for the past several years to spin up and operate a grant finding tool and grant reporting tools that are specifically tailored to small communities and networks of grant seekers. So what you'll hear from me today is the observations drawn from both those parts of our organization. So let's go to the next slide. And in our observation across the country, as we look at where everyone is now, I kind of like this aligns with the poll findings. There's sort of three levels of maturity in the current use of AI tools inside government. Most communities are either getting ready or just getting started. That's the 90%. So attending seminars like this one, creating guidelines and policies, figuring out some good use cases. And those that are further along might actually be starting work on a few of those, maybe exploring some technical solutions and costs. Maybe the lucky ones have someone who's a tinkerer like Anthony, who's figuring out some ways in which you can put these AI tools to work. So let's go to the next slide. One of the things that our grants program does is we do user research on how small communities go after grants to try and think about how we can help lower some of those barriers. And so what our user research with over 350 communities, like the ones on the phone today, what's the most complex part of the grant process? It's prep, it's finding the right grant, it's vetting the right grant, and then the last one, deciding to apply. How do you assemble the information you need to get all the people around you that have to decide, including the city council and the mayor, that yes, we should go after this grant. So, there's some sample questions you could ask an AI tool to help you with in this arena. I'm looking for a federal grant opportunity to help my community replace culverts or support safe streets. What are some grants that could help me? And it should spit back a number of grants that could help you. But you might want to go one step deeper and say, thanks for showing me those. What are the requirements and would my community be able to fit them? And then you could go a step further and perhaps ask, who applied for this grant last year and who got awards? And what data do I need to substantiate my grant application? Or some editing help. How do I best tailor our boilerplate narrative, which you'll upload into the tool, to this opportunity to win it, right? And the tool should be able to give you advice on all of those things. So let's go to the next slide. And here, what I've laid out is kind of what we think are the highest, the medium, and the low priority use cases for grants. So finding, targeting, and analyzing opportunities, I can tell you one very fertile area that people are experimenting with actively now are looking at how to use AI to extract information from NOFOs, notices of funding opportunity, which are complex, difficult to access, not standard. If you were to just take the two grants I mentioned earlier, Safe Streets for All, that's a 43-page NOFO single-spaced. You got to get all the way to page 43 to finally figure out whether you could qualify to apply for it or not. If you were interested in culvert removal and replacement, you'd have to not only wade through a 53-page NOFO, but go to a separate website for the 18-page Q&A, right? This is where we should be using AI tools to help us extract the value-added information that's most important for going after grants. And then the second area, I think, is synthesizing data and drafting proposals. I think the key is, how do we use these tools to draft a grant and draft some of the supporting materials without it seeming like, fan fiction written by a robot? We've all read those, and you can tell. And we don't want them to be absurdly elementary or just nonsense. So let's talk about common pitfalls. Go to the next slide. Thank you. And there are three I want us to talk about, and I'm pleased to say that Anthony and the Streamline folks are very conscious of these as well, and so you'll see these addressed with real experiments later in this session. The first is to guard data privacy. So sensitive local data might be reused by the model. We actually really don't know what these models do with it and where it lands. So it's really important not to put PII into the model or personally identifiable information. Second thing, watch for bias. These models are built by humans with all of their own inbuilt biases. So you want to check if you've asked it to generate some narrative for you, or interpret data for you, you want to check for bias. And then lastly, you want to use good prompt engineering. Now, that doesn't mean it's quick and it doesn't mean it's on time. It turns out prompts are different, right? Prompts are the questions we ask the tool. And so when you're asking the tool questions, you want it to ask it questions so it's giving you good answers. So it should support our decision-making, but not substitute for it. So you're going to want to avoid open-ended questions, ask for and check citations, and always use a content expert to supervise. In other words, each one of you that's intimately involved in writing grants and knows about your communities need to read that stuff to be sure it hasn't invented a waterfall in the middle of downtown that doesn't exist. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So 3 principles to think about. The first is write clear and specific instructions. So how do you do that? Well, you might want to add a persona or a style for what you want written. So you might want to say to the tool, I want you to write this at a 6th grade level or a 12th grade level or a college level, and what you will get back will vary. And then be clear about who the AI tool is writing for. Who's consuming this information? Is it a professional grant manager? Is it an expert in water quality? Or is it a grant proposal reviewer? Because it will take those hints and then structure its answer accordingly. And then this is where there's real value. Ask the model to check if all the conditions are satisfied. In other words, has it answered all of the required questions from the grant instructions for that section? So if you were to say, can you help me punch up this narrative? And then you might say, and have I answered every point that the program managers wanted me to answer in this section? So that's one principle. Second is to give the model time to think. Now, you might want to think about this hint as asking the model to show its work. This is really important because if you have the model show you each of the steps it used to complete the task, and you ask it to work out its own solution and think step by step, then it is more likely to give you a consistent answer. It's just like your 10-year-old ADHD kid, you don't want it to jump to a conclusion too quickly. You got to kind of get it down the path and think consistently. So if you're using the model, let's see, to analyze a pile of data, you're going to want to specify the steps. I want you to find me the number of vehicle pedestrian accidents for all neighborhoods in my city for 2023. Then I want you to divide it by the number of months in the year. Then I want you to show me the average value per month for each neighborhood in the city. And when you work out that solution, Mr. Model, I want you to compare it to the monthly values that we've posted on our transparency website to make sure those values are in range, right? So you want to clearly show each step of the calculation, explain the reasoning, and validate the answers. And lastly, splitting complex tasks into simpler subtasks. You heard me do that with this example about pedestrian accidents in the city. We went through each step and told it exactly how to get it done. So you want to think about doing that. Don't ask it to create an entire presentation about climate change. Ask it to tell you several things first. Do some research, outline some main points, create some slides, and then help me develop a presentation. So those are a little rules for the road about how to think about avoiding some of the toughest pitfalls in using AI. Let's go on to the next and my last slide, which is just to say that, our vision needs to be, how are we using these tools responsibly for better public services? So with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Tina to go to our next speaker. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Perry. And before you put down the mic entirely, I want to invite you to share one more piece of advice at this point, which is in those poll results, you saw that we had folks on today's call, some of whom have never used any of these mainstream Gen AI tools, some who are using them more frequently for work tasks. My question for you is, what do you say to those on today's call who have never used them, and just to help them get started? Is there any advice you have? And for everyone's knowledge, Perry used to be a state budget director. So Perry, in some cases, I can appreciate that there may be, there may be a sense of, oh, am I allowed to use these tools or should I be? So what advice do you have for folks on today's call?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you're all in big governments, and often people in big governments don't know, I mean, all of us, right? We don't know what people in another building are doing. So the first thing I would do is I would make sure I've reached out to the CIO to find out whether there are rules that they've adopted over there in the IT shop about whether you can use AI to prepare your grant. Okay, so that's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is I'd start experimenting and with some low risk stuff. So I'll give you an example of what I did. So I was like, okay, this chat GPT stuff, I got to figure it out, right? So I did exactly what I told you not to do in this last slide. I said, tell me about something I was doing research on. And it literally came back and said, you're going to have to perform that research yourself. Here are some resources you can go to. That was like one of the most unsatisfying interactions with with one of these tools I've ever had. Now, I'll give you another example, which is I had written a blog post and recently, and I said, I'm going to use one of these tools to figure out whether I've written it at the right grade level. And it was really interesting. I said I wanted it written at, I think, a 12th grade reading level. And it came back to me and it said, you know what? Part of this is at fourth grade and part of it's at college level. So you better figure it out, right? So that was super interesting. And actually, not only did it tell me exactly what sentences to fix, it gave me a draft that was done at 12th grade level. So I would encourage you to, just play around with it in low risk situations.
Yeah.
That's the best thing to do. And be prepared to be frustrated till you learn how to use it. It's like riding a bike.
That's great advice, and I think we can all relate to that. Thank you, Perry.
Thank you, Tina.
Now, building on Perry's overview, I'm going to invite my friend Anthony Townsend from Cornell Tech, who's going to show us how to put those principles that Perry just walked us through. Now, how do you put those principles to work? And he's going to give us a chance to dig into the specific opportunities and challenges that these tools raise. So, Anthony, over to you for some time for live demos.
Cool.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks, Perry. So what I'm going to do is pick up from the slide that Perry showed of sort of high, medium, low priority use cases for AI, generative AI, and grant writing, and start with sort of some of the low and medium use cases. And then as the hour goes on, myself and Helena will show some of the sort of higher priority use cases. But I'm going to kind of go in at the beginning and not overwhelm folks because there's a lot of nuances to how these things work. So we're going to start with ChatGPT. This is by far the most well-known, most popular. And when you go to ChatGPT, you basically are confronted with this screen. And there's a couple things just to keep an eye out for. One is there's my face up in the corner. So I know that I'm logged in. And I actually have a ChatGPT Plus subscription, just $20 a month. It's worth the money if you use it a lot. It gives you access to some of the higher powered, more the newer models, as well as some other capabilities. But there's also a free tier that has all the features I'm going to show today and uses the latest kind of top of the line model called ChatGPT 4.0. And that's available for the free tier. And generally with the paid subscriptions, you just get more multimodal kinds of tools. So you can generate images as well as text. And you also get more capacity. So you can have longer conversations more often. You get priority at crunch time. So you're less likely to get a message saying that the system is busy, which is starting to happen. So you can definitely get your feet wet for free and make a decision later about whether to pay. A couple other things to note here. Once you log in, you will also get sort of a history of all your chats going back pretty far. So if you have a conversation, it's interesting, and then you close your browser, or you turn off your computer or walk away, you can jump back in, and these are basically bookmarks back to those conversations. And then the other key thing, all the concerns that Perry mentioned, is doing a little bit of due diligence about just like what the terms are of the software that you're using. There's information in here about how data that gets put into these conversations is actually used to train the AI to work better. That's one of the key ways that these companies continue to improve these tools, is by tailoring them to the uses that people are actually using them for. But again, there's definite risk when you put any kind of personal, sensitive, private data into these, that it will get incorporated into those models somehow. So I think the safest way to use these is to only use public information. There may be some instances where you take a small piece of something that isn't public and put it in, but you really want to be very controlled with that. So all that said, first use case I'm going to demonstrate is taking a federal infrastructure NOFO and just basically doing a quick start on your proposal. What we're going to work with is the 2023 Safe Streets and Roads for All Notice of Funding Opportunity, which that's long in the past. The awards have already been made, but it's a good one. It's one that's popular with cities that have been participating in the series. It's long, it's complicated. And so basically the way that process starts is I have attached the actual NOFO PDF that I downloaded from DOT's archive. And now I'm gonna prompt the LLM to do something with that document. So I'm doing a bunch of things here that follow what Perry's instructions were. So I'm giving it what's called a system prompt, essentially telling it what hat or what role it should play as it composes its results. And basically what this does is it queues up a whole bunch of like linkages in the language model that zoom us into a vocabulary, a way of generating text that's very relevant to these topics. Basically, what it does is it sort of increases the probability that certain words will be generated. And so what this tells it to do is really zero in on words that are related to grant writing, small municipalities, and federal infrastructure. I'm asking it to do something, and it's a very specific set of instructions. Prepare a basic outline for a proposal based on this NOFO. And then I'm giving it some more kind of quality control checklist. Make sure you include all the required sections and subsections in the correct order, and give me the approximate length of each section and subsection. So as many of you grant writers know, this is kind of one of the first steps, right? Like I have to figure out what the work plan is here, who I need to reach out to provide the information for these different sections. I need to kind of allocate pages in my response to the different requirements. And then I fire this off, and the results come back pretty quickly. The speed will vary sometimes depending on time of day. And none of this is rocket science, but it's a nice quick way to basically generate an outline that you can then start planning from. And I find, like, of all the jobs that might get killed by AI, I think there's a lot of management consultants that are going to be out of work, because one of the great things that generative AI does is plan, make checklists, make frameworks that are really like ruthlessly comprehensive. It doesn't have, like a moment where maybe it remembers 3 of the 4 categories or 9 of the 10 steps. It remembers all of them every time. That's just incredibly powerful tool for people who want to focus on bigger questions. So you can just have the checklist handed to you.
Hey, Anthony.
Yes,
While
please.
While this is populating, we had a question in the chat I thought I'd lob to you right now, which
Sure.
is Miranda is asking, are there limitations to how long ChatGPT's response can be with the free version? Or like, are there limitations to what you can do with the free
That's a
version?
great question. I don't have the details top of mind, but different AI chat services have, and different models within those have different what are called context windows. And that's basically a way of describing like what the model's short-term memory is. So every time I ask another question here or make another comment, it's essentially running the whole conversation again to respond to the last question. That's sort of how its memory works. And there are limits on that length. Different models, different services like Claude, which is Anthropic, one of the spinoffs from OpenAI, they have models that have extremely long context windows, and you can generate very, very lengthy conversations with lots and lots of supporting documents. And yes, generally, the amount of context you have is sort of something that you pay more for. I will show when I do the data example that there are some limits, especially when you're working with big data sets, the amount of context that these tools can handle. But generally, you can ask for shorter and longer responses as well. You can say, give me a specific word length. You can say that was too short, say more, in the same way that Perry also was talking about prompting for a sort of reading level. So that's the first interaction. So I'm pretty happy with that. Like that saved me, let's say a half an hour at least skimming through and, reading all the requirements, making a checklist and sort of coming up with a rough starting plan. So I also attended a local infrastructure hub webinar, and I know that there's more than one kind of grant available in this program. So I remember I've already told it I'm from a small municipality. So I'm going to ask it which type of grant I should apply for and see what kind of response I get. So it's going to give me a little lesson, which is nice because now that I've seen this kind of due diligence, I'm much more likely to trust the answer. And so basically it's saying, which we know there's planning and demonstration grants and implementation grants. And then it'll give me some sort of almost direct quotations from the NOFO. And this is where the kind of conversational capability really starts to shine. I could follow its advice. And it's basically giving me like a if-then kind of framework for making this decision. I can just be like, well, can't you do the if-then for me? Because I already told you I'm a small municipality. And it immediately starts to steer me towards the planning and demonstration grant. Other AIs that I did, so I did this one with Claude initially, and Claude zeroed right in. It remembered the context that I had given it, that I was a small municipality. And when I asked it this first question, it said, you should probably go for a planning and implementation grant because you probably don't have a safety action plan already. So, you'll get sort of different levels of insight from these tools as well. But the more that you prompt them and the more that you use the responses to hone in on the information that you're trying to get, the more effective they can be. And then this is also super useful features. Now that we've decided which of the two types of grants we should apply for, alarm bell's going off in my head that's saying, well, why didn't it take this into consideration when we did the outline in the beginning? And is that outline still relevant? And so let's just ask it to update its outline. And what you'll see here is it basically comes back and says, oh yeah, that's going to be a much simpler proposal because the requirements for a planning and demonstration grant are actually much less elaborate than they are for the implementation grants. And so, in the course of 4 or 5 minutes, we have parsed the NOFO for the core set of requirements, made a plan for our proposal, gone back and assessed like which of the several grant types is most relevant for us, and then honed down that outline. And so this is, I think a considerable time savings, with one exception. Is this a robust and reliable assessment of what's actually in that NOFO? Because remember, so far we haven't even looked at the NOFO. The only thing that's looked at the NOFO is a piece of software written in California. So this is where the planning ability of these machines then really, really comes into focus. Is I'm going to ask it to basically make me a plan to check its outputs, and give me a checklist of like what are the places that I really need to go, and myself manually inspect the NOFO to make sure that the LLM got it right. And so, what it spits back out is, detailed section, page, paragraph citations telling me where to look to double check the things that it has told me. And this again is like a huge time saver, because now I can run through this. I can check all these off, and if they're 100% right, I'm going to feel really good about going ahead with that outline. If they're 90% right, I may decide I'm going to set aside 20 minutes to really check it thoroughly, or read the NOFO in detail myself. Or I'm going to pass it on to a colleague or a subordinate with some very specific instructions about how they can do the quality control. So, that's one use case. I don't know if there's questions in the chat or any comments from my colleagues on the panel that we want to address now before I move on to the next one.
Anthony, so the chat is very active, which you're not seeing because you're doing the demoing. And some of the questions that have come up, like from Audrey, Audrey had asked the question, for the work plan it generated, would you check its work? And you just showed us how you would do that. So actually, let me pause here and invite Perry or Helena. Anything you want to chime in on? Helena has been actively responding to folks' questions. Thank you, Helena. But would love to hear from Perry or Helena right now if they have anything to add.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I think a lot of the questions are around like quality control, and I think Anthony's response there is perfect. It's like ask for it to cite itself, and I think Perry also did a fantastic job at walking through how to increase the first response's quality and almost like breaking down the steps more. So I think the only modification I would have done to Anthony's demo is like break down the first set of prompts more to include some of that, and then you have less of the wrestling back and forth. But I think for some of this stuff, you just have to experiment a bunch, right? Figure out what prompts work. And then you get to a point where, okay, now my first prompts are perfectly massaged and I can get that higher quality, but you just have to go back and forth and assume that it is missing some kind of context and ask it to check itself. Something that we played with right in the beginning was instructing it to kind of, and there's like a lot of like LLM quality research. And like one of the papers that we kind of built a lot of our stuff on was like, asking, like if you're looking at the context of like writing like an essay, you ask the LLM to like become a teacher and grade it. Same thing in like the grant writing world, right? Like you ask it to be a reviewer and to like evaluate itself. And often what you'll see is that the first pass, it's going to say, oh, this is terrible, like low score. And then you ask it, hey, what would I do to improve the score? And then it comes up with how to improve it. And it's able to apply that to itself. So we do the exact same thing, and you can do that in ChatGPT too, right? It's like ask it to evaluate its response, like how accurate is this with the NOFO?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, go fix it. And then over time with iteration, it like gets to that better result.
No, I think I'm catching up on all the chat questions. I think the reason I picked this specific use case was because, we're not really generating any content yet. We're just generating a plan for work that we would have done anyway, and we're using the AI to kind of bootstrap that planning process, do it a little bit faster, and maybe get like a little bit of kind of effort to help us make sure it's comprehensive. But yeah, lots more quality control for sure. in the interest of time, why don't I jump on to the next one? Because it will actually invoke some of these things that Helen was just talking about. So the second use case is, I think of as like proposal quality control. Okay, so human beings have drafted a section of a proposal that is responding to requirements in the NOFO. And what we're trying to do here is make sure that our response meets all of the points that are required by the NOFO. So continuing with Safe Streets and Roads for All 2023, we pulled out one specific section of the required selection criteria that has to do with equity, engagement, and collaboration. So let me go back to sharing. So I started a new chat. This is the text from the NOFO. We can take a look at it later, maybe in the PDF, so it's a little clearer. But it's about, you know, a half a page of bullets that are, you know, 6 or 7 very specific directives about like what this part of your NOFO response has to include around equity, engagement, and collaboration. Okay.
And Anthony, just to make it really explicitly clear, you're just copying and pasting from
Yes.
that document, right?
Oh, so here's the better view. This is the sort of staging area that I set up. So this is the text from the DOT NOFO. We also went into the Local Infrastructure Hub Winning Proposals Library, which you all have access to, and pulled out Columbus, Ohio's Winning Safe Streets and Roads for All proposal from 2023. So this is about a page of text that is that team's successful funded response to this specific selection criteria. And we're going to pass all this in through the prompt and essentially say, given the following selection criteria for a federal grant, here's the selection criteria, are there any major omissions or gaps in the following draft proposal response? So I'm going to put all of that in here. And ChatGPT is going to think about it for a little bit and give us, you know, an assessment. Generally, thumbs up. And this is one of the things that I think people really have a hard time with AI is you don't need to be polite. You can be really direct. And my experience, they tend to work much better when you're really direct and bossy, frankly, like with it. They'll always be polite, and in some cases, like even obsequious in return. But you know, it is not a human being; it's a machine, and you're using it to do your work, and you should feel entitled to boss it around. And then you can even direct it like to be more direct with you. You can say like, "Don't hold back. Don't," you know, really kind of trying to prime the pump to get what you need back from it. So this is a sort of, you know, pretty terse but polite response. So generally a thumbs up. However, here are some things you can do better. So this is all information we can use as we consider rewriting. We can, you know, use it to disseminate to reviewers if we want them to verify it. And then I'm going to do sort of an iteration on what Helena just talked about, which is I'm going to ask it to score us because this qualitative feedback is useful, but I kind of want something a little clearer about like, you know, how much room do we have for improvement? So that's interesting. So one of the other things about LLMs is that they're non-deterministic. You can put the same inputs in and get different outputs. Last time we did this, when I was preparing this draft, got a 70 with the exact same prompts. But this is nice because it's sort of telling us why we got points. It created a rubric, first of all, and then it showed us where we kind of nailed it, and then where we can improve and how much room we have to improve. And that, you know, is really helpful for, again, we haven't asked it to generate any content. We're just asking it to help us plan our grant writing. Now I'm going to ask it, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I'm not giving you any extra information, but like, can you make some revisions that would help us address those shortcomings, and being very explicit about not making anything up. So that's a way of trying to dampen its tendency to hallucinate information that it thinks you want to see. And so it gives me some specific revisions. Again, these are things I can look at, I can consider. I would refrain from cutting and pasting stuff like this back into proposals, but you can put it side by side with your text as you edit. And often, it's like having a second reader. And then I can say, okay, I'm going to go even further out on a limb and say, okay, I want you to take those revisions, incorporate them into my response, and score it again. And so this is basically, asking it to rewrite the essay and then to score the rewritten, not essay, I'm sorry, the response, and then to score it. This is, we're in a little bit sort of murkier territory here, because now I am in a position where I'm considering using AI written content in a proposal. And then I'm asking it essentially to convince me that that's better by giving me a higher numeric score. So I think the last couple steps of this, I really just wanted to show, to demonstrate sort of along the lines of what Helen was talking about, that like, asking it to boil down the changes, boil down documents into like a single metric, and then you can use that to track like how it's improving over time as you go through revisions. We could have written it by hand and then just asked it to score that hand rewrite again. And what you see is it's not perfect, but it's starting to align a little bit. So we can save and hopefully distribute this chat. And if folks want to go back and look at like some of the details of some of the revisions that it made, and form their own opinion about whether those are improvements or not, that's something we can definitely do. So I think I'm going to stop there. That's sort of the, I think, amateur getting started. We probably made some beginner mistakes, but we've also toyed around with some kind of advanced prompt engineering techniques and showed a couple different ways that you can interact with these tools to get insights and feedback on the drafts that you're producing, as well as on the documents that you're responding to.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I think as you get caught up in the chat, you're going to see this. There was a lot of activity. I think this is really helpful. I don't know about everybody else. It makes a totally different impact for me as a user to see it in real time generating content versus we all hear and read about, oh, here's what you can use generative AI for. It's totally different when you see it, right? So I want to build on those demos. And again, for those of you who can stay past the top of the hour, Anthony's going to do some more demos, specifically on like, how can you use these tools for data analysis, which we think will be really helpful. But first, we want to hear from Helena, who is the co-founder and CEO of Streamline Climate. Helena, we don't have, we're short on time, but I want to ask you a couple quick questions. So first, so you have built a tool that is aimed at helping grant seekers use AI to write better proposals for federal climate tech funding. Can you just share with us briefly, what was the need that you saw when you then started Streamline?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I guess we started the company after I had talked to over 100 like climate organizations, right? They were mostly early stage companies, and then increasingly we started talking to larger and larger organizations, started talking to local governments, started talking to community benefit organizations, and realized that so many people kind of run into this issue around just having enough capacity to pursue government funding. And I also really liked one of the slides which showed all the different challenges. And one of the big ones that we've also focused on is in the discovery piece. And I think Anthony's example did a really good job at showing that you can't write well if you don't understand the solicitation well. So the approach we've taken is, let's build a massive data set of all the different funding opportunities on the federal, state, and even local level in order to then help match you to them as well as right. Because if you can't find the right ones, you're definitely not going to apply to them. But yeah, that's what we kind of saw over and over again. And there's so much capital out there that should get deployed. It's just kind of stuck in this hard to navigate limbo.
Yeah. Well, and we saw with Anthony's demos that there's a lot you can do with tools that are either free, or in the example of his demo, he used the $20 a month ChatGPT Plus. I'd love to hear from you. Where do you see the need for more capabilities in grant writing tools? Like, based on your experience, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously depends on your needs, right? If you're not writing a bunch of grants, you can hack together a tool. And I don't recommend investing in anything like Streamline if like you're doing one-off kind of work. I think specialized tools come into play when if it's like your main thing, right? If you, with more capacity, could be pursuing more funding, and that's really a limiting factor, it makes sense to like get the best tool out there to save you the most amount of time and headache. What we've seen and this is kind of outside of the scope of just writing grants, it's like AI tools in particular are more effective when they are purpose-built for one kind of solution, right? You have less hallucinations, you can have features specific to grant writing, and there's all sorts of things that like a ChatGPT interface won't, like OpenAI essentially is never going to build for grant writers, right? Their whole goal as a company is to build a general language model. So we've worked with them to kind of build a very specialized solution to make sure that like the actual needs of grant writers are met.
Really helpful. Before we run out of time, can you give us a quick demo? Like show us what you've built.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm super excited. I mean, it's interesting because normally I give like a spiel around things to watch out for, and that's all been covered so beautifully. So I'm just gonna jump right into what we do.
Great.
The first thing I want to show you. So I wish I'd lined up the demo to be the same grant, because I think that would have been a beautiful continuation. But I'm starting here on our Discover tool, where we scrape across 45 different funders, bring it all into one ecosystem. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because this ties back to Harry's original comment around the ability to search across NOFOs. So again, that's kind of where we started. We have all of these just indexed in our system, and I'm going to demo this just on the Raise grant. Maybe, there we go. And what we do for all these opportunities is we pull in all the different documentations and files. So in this case, the Raise grant has been around for a long time. So there's a lot of data that we can pull from, but even for just this current cycle, there's, the current NOFO, as well as all the different other attachments. And this is, a closed opportunity, but same things apply, where we pull in webinar transcripts, we pull in all the different types of details and let you search across all of them. So any kind of question that you might have, it kind of scans all of these. And then what we'll see next is just like diving into actually kind of shredding all the different requirements and then writing for it. So we'll let this answer. Here we go. And one thing that I want to highlight here is that everything is cited. So one of the things to kind of look out for in any of these tools is like, can you tie the generation back to the underlying source? And that's part of what we've been working so hard on, is like, can you see where it came from? And I don't know what's going on with this highlighting here, but the underlying sources are all here, and you can open the PDFs under the hood.
That's huge. That gets back to that validation piece that we talked about earlier.
Yes, and like any AI tool that you're looking at, like that is something to look for. And then the other thing I'll highlight is like making sure that none of the data that you upload is getting used for model training. And that's another reason to like use a specialized tool and not use the free version of ChatGPT. Like pay the $20 if you're going to use it in order for them not to use your models. But in Streamline, we also don't do any model training with data you upload. Okay, so what I clicked on was continue. Like, let's say I want to apply for this opportunity. Our system is going to shred the solicitation and look for all those requirements. So one of those things is, what are all the deliverables? So Anthony walked through how to do that in ChatGPT. We automate all of that. We have all the prompts on the back end. We generate all these with kind of requirements built in, and we show you exactly where those all came from in this like compliance matrix piece. So obviously there's the content requirements around all the deliverables, but then there's like eligibility and all sorts of other things. Every single one of these is going to be tied back to the underlying part of the NOFO. It's going to like highlight it in the PDF. So you'll be able to trust that, hey, this came from the right place. You don't have to like have anxiety about like, did it hallucinate or not? And you can kind of just keep going, and we'll kind of do all of that management on your behalf. The final thing I'll show is what it looks like to actually write. So we have all these requirements. We use that to help generate outlines for all the deliverables. And then we jump in to actually work on the deliverable. We automate some of the stuff that Anthony was walking through around. We have our past grant opportunity or like past written things, and we want to modify it. In this example, we are the fictional town of Pawnee, Indiana. And that is from the show Parks and Rec, if you're not familiar. And we are applying to this grant, which is the RAISE grant. I've prepared it with some past documents. We just pulled things from Wikipedia from like fan fiction. But in your case, you would have other grants that you would work off of. And we help you repurpose those for the upcoming project. So in this case, we're building a light rail station, extending what they have in the show, which is 1 block, and making it way longer. And to do that effectively, right, we have this outline generated, as well as review criteria of what we know they're looking for. So we can kind of do that scoring thing in an automated way. And we tie everything back to the funder, what's worked in the past, et cetera. And all of that is like context that's been embedded here into the editor. And I'm going to show this one prompt, which I find the most exciting. So all of these are prompts. It's in this like collaborative editor, kind of like a Google Doc. And the prompts are, again, linked to what the funder is looking for. In this case, we hyperlink to a definition that the Department of Transportation has defined in their NOFO. So describe how the product incorporates considerations of climate change and environmental justice in the product planning or delivery project. If you were to do this by hand, you kind of have to look up what is their definition of environmental justice. So instead, we've like deep linked this to their definition of it in order to like hydrate that additional kind of paragraph of context into the response. So then when you look to answer this, it's able to kind of incorporate all of that as it knows kind of what the funder is looking for.
Helena, we want to make sure we ask some closing questions to the audience. Oh, thank you, Jamie. Jamie at the ready. So folks, particularly for those of you who have to drop at the top of the hour, we want to hear from you if this session has helped expand your existing knowledge, and then what topics are of interest for further exploration, because we want to continue this discussion. Helena, do you want to share your screen and just show us sort of what it was generating at that step?
We're just short on time. There's just so many things.
I know. Well, we might just have to have you back. But so talk to us about what this is while folks are responding to the poll.
Yeah, sounds good. So what I did was I generated a few key points. These are pulled from my own documents that I've uploaded. And it's kind of built around this idea that like it's helping you brainstorm, right? You are the expert driving the ship. And that's extremely important, right? Like if you don't know what you're proposing, AI is not going to be able to help you. It's a way of like extending your own kind of brain power. You can kind of modify these, you can edit them, you can kind of do further on prompting, like Anthony was describing, make it shorter, make it longer. And then when you're done, kind of turn it into. And then there's all sorts of other features around like doing like AI feedback, getting that scoring and reincorporating that we're not going to dive into now, but this is the gist of it. It's like, it's kind of your like workflow automation tool to like remove a lot of the complexities around having to become an AI or grant expert, because it does take a lot of experimenting, and our team has been doing a lot of that work. So I know how hard it is. That doesn't mean don't try, like, definitely play with all those tools. And there's all sorts of different ones that are all good at different things.
Helena, this was, first off, the tool you've built is incredible. It's so helpful to hear that you built this based on user needs that you heard again and again and again. And I'm so sorry we are short on time, but thank you for sharing this and your expertise throughout the session with us. For those of you, it is the top of the hour. And so for those of you who do have to drop, thank you for coming. For those of you who are able to stay, I saw that half of folks are interested in exploring how can generative AI help out with data analysis. So that's what we're going to spend the next half hour doing. If you can't stay, that's all right. We're going to have some future programming in the Tech and Innovation Center series to sort of pick up on that theme. So if you have to drop, totally understand. But Helena and Perry, I hope that y'all can stay on as well, because both of you have just been sharing so many nuggets of knowledge. Anthony, shall we come back to you for some more demos?
Yeah, before we jump in, do we want to see if anybody in the audience has anything to bring forward, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been so much chatter.
Yeah, and what we want to hear from folks is like, what questions do you have that you want to ask any and all of our speakers? Are there additional demos you'd want to see? We want to make this a little bit more interactive to answer questions that are on your mind. Anaga, I see you raised your hand. Go ahead if you want to come off mute.
Yes, hi. I actually pasted this question in the chat, but it might have gotten buried. I was actually curious, are any of these tools able to actually evaluate your final proposal draft right before you're about to submit it? Can they evaluate it for, compliance with the grant's requirements? Because oftentimes these, these grant PDFs are like 20 pages long and they have a lot of like finer details that you tend to miss in like huge teams that are working to create a proposal. So what does that look like to make sure you got everything?
I mean, I would just jump in with two responses. So I think what I showed would be able to give you a second checklist that it extracts, but you can't be guaranteed, right, that that's like everything, because the way that these off-the-shelf tools, as Helen explained, like they're sort of general purpose tools, they'll get a pretty good answer. Whether it's better than your own team's checklist that you've generated, open question, but it's a different checklist. And so it's like another screening tool. What Helena demonstrated, has a bunch of mechanisms in it that are pretty rigorous. And I think, you can say more about it. Like that's I think, a whole sort of step above in terms of how well like engineered and designed that process is for this use case.
Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah.
One question that Wanda just put in the chat, and Rebecca Kiernan had asked this question earlier in today's session, is around how do you decide which of these mainstream tools to use? Are some tools better than others for different uses? So would love to hear thoughts. Wanda specifically said, do you recommend that we use ChatGPT? And Wanda, what I'll tell you is we're not going to endorse or recommend any given tool. But let me open up that question to our speakers. Are there tools that you recommend for different purposes, such as grant writing or data analysis as a separate use case?
I've been using Perplexity a lot. Perplexity is really interesting if you haven't checked it out. It's like built around accessing public data, just like internet data. And I think it does a way better job at identifying resources than Google if you're looking for those. Then there's other tools that are helpful if you're trying to do just like research and like find interesting things like that. I think consensus.app is one that I've been seeing increasingly pop up. If you haven't come, I'll send these links as part of Wanda's message. But what I'd say is like, I would just play with them. It's kind of like, do you like Word or Google Docs? Like some of it just comes down to personal preference, right? Like, what do you like the most? Where do you feel most comfortable? And try it, have fun, experiment.
Anthony, Perry, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would say I've actually used Claude for narrative and editing. I find it much better, much less mechanistic than ChatGPT. It actually, they've really spent some time on teaching it how to write with a style. So I found it produces higher quality narrative, if that's what you're looking at. I haven't done a lot of data analysis yet using the tools, but I've seen what other people have developed with ChatGPT, and it's amazing, just amazing.
Yeah, just like on the editing for style point, like that's an area where a lot of kind of ruthless, aggressive prompting, like being a harsh editor. I sometimes imagine myself as like the grumpy old editor at the Daily News, and I'm like, that's terrible, go back and make it shorter, get to the point faster, like that kind of stuff, because that's where the power of like fast kind of generation of content really gets used. And so then you have 10 different versions and you can say, okay, take this one and then do this with it.
Yeah.
And you end up very quickly honing in on the style that you want.
Nice. Let me, Perry Doritza in the chat asked how AI can help with budget creation, and wanted to ask if there's any initial thoughts that you have top of mind.
I would imagine that you could ask a tool to go out to a spreadsheet you might have of a lot of detailed cost accounting codes and get it to aggregate the data and give you some trends over time fairly easily. I would use it to help me develop some graphs and pictures of what you're trying to show. Would I ask it to substitute for the kind of analysis and analytics that you would expect a good budget analyst with understanding of the program area and why certain variances occurred? Would I ask it to substitute for that? I don't think so. Not at all. It's going to come up with findings that are just out to lunch, right? So, I wouldn't use it for that, but, I would use it for collecting data, collating data, formatting it in the right format for a particular grant proposal. It may be the grant proposal has an exact format you're supposed to use for your budget. You can ask it to go reformat it for you, that kind of thing. So remember, it's not smarter than you are, right? It is not. No, it is. That's why they call it artificial intelligence, right? I think Anthony's been trying to emphasize this. That's why you got to tell it what to do.
I mean, I agree 100%, but like, I think in many cases it's demonstrably faster.
Yes.
So that iterative process where you're the taskmaster and you're really forcing this thing to keep doing it until it gets it right and take direction. And that's when I find you get the most effective outcomes.
Yeah, so like a fundamental piece of LLMs that might help in understanding how to prompt better is that at the end of the day, it's a predictive model. It's like in a series of these 3 words, what is the most likely next word? Right. And like that is all it's doing at scale. So from that perspective, it is really dumb. Like it's extremely dumb. And if you aren't the expert driving it, you're going to end up kind of like often going the wrong direction. So you really need to know what you're doing in order to use it effectively. But like if you know what you're doing, if you know what the ideal outcome is, then it's like the most time-saving tool you could ever imagine.
I love it. All right. I'm going to keep my eye on the chat for other questions that come up. But Anthony, let's get back to demos.
Yeah.
You teed up how to use generative AI for data analysis.
Yeah. So getting back to Safe Streets and Roads for All, and please, my colleagues, chime in on this one because we're getting into, let's say, experimental territory here. Using LLMs for data analysis is pretty new, even by this kind of tool standards, and some of them are better than others. And you really have to open up the black box to have confidence in the results here. So we'll show a little bit about how to do that. So what I did was I went over to, I imagined that we're reporting as New York City, City of New York, on pedestrian safety statistics after implementing some Safe Streets and Roads for All protocol. And basically what I want to do is take this massive, I think it's like a 50,000 row table of motor vehicle accidents in New York City that's provided through the open data portal, boil it down to just the pedestrian involved ones, and then write up some narrative summary of how those trends have evolved over the last calendar year. So I went into this tool, I selected just the last calendar years, July 1st to July 1st, 2023 to 2024, filtered on pedestrians and downloaded that. It's about 10,000 rows, 10,000 events, pedestrians injured by motor vehicles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that into the prompt. It's a CSV data file. And then I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write me a 1-paragraph summary of motor vehicle collisions involving pedestrians during the time period that the data contains, and to give it, a spin, so to speak. And that it should emphasize, to the extent supported by the data, continued improvement in pedestrian safety. I'm not sure we're going to get the same results I did during the test, but let's see what we get. you can see it's imported the data. It understands that this is a table. This is where you'll get key differences with other LLMs. So if you tried to do this in Claude would just treat this as a big piece of text and get really inaccurate results. ChatGPT is smart enough to know that it's data and to treat it separate than text in a different way. So it composes the paragraph that I asked it to do. It did sort of give it that narrative slant that I had asked it to take. And then it cites some specific facts that it has tabulated from that data table. Now, what's really cool is that you can click on this little cursor prompt and actually see the Python code that it generated and then ran to come up with those numbers. So this is a really good way of being able to verify the results. You could take this code and run it separately. Depending on your skill level, you might have to hand this off to a data scientist on your team. It's a little bit more complicated. In an ideal world, it would have given you back, say, an Excel spreadsheet with the tabulations so that, you could do it with regular desktop Office software. But what's nice about this is that it is telling you explicitly how it got these answers. So that gives you some capability to verify them. The question that comes up here is like, given that we do have some concerns about the accuracy and we have to spend some time validating these, potentially involve another person in validating these, did I actually save any time? Is this something that I could have gone into Excel and done these tabulations myself and been confident that they were done right? I think, it depends upon the complexity of the data set, how big it is. Does it fit into a spreadsheet? How many other rows are there? Is this something that I'm going to be having to navigate like a giant table, doing subtotals, doing it 4 or 5 times for different calculations to get these? I think the balance of the judgment is on, yes, it is a time saver. But again, you have to build in the time and build in the rigor of making sure that it's correct. I think as you work with tools like these, you will become more and more confident, and you will have to do those thorough double checks of the math less frequently. Maybe start moving to like a spot check kind of process. But it composed a pretty nice paragraph. Trying to think.
Anthony, can you show us?
Go
I
ahead.
think at one point when we were preparing for this, you did it in a different tool, or maybe it was even in this tool, and it got it wrong.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you figured that out, and then why it makes sense sometimes to run the same data set through 2 different tools and see if there's something going on?
Yeah. So let's do the same experiment in Claude. And Helen, you might have a more precise explanation of why this works this way. But Claude isn't going to generate code and show it to me. Oh, okay. Claude also has a very different set of constraints around how much data you can feed into the prompt. So even though I'm using the paid version of Claude, this table is actually too big for Claude to process. It's like almost 5 times too big. But even if I did it with just an excerpt, like 1 month of this data, Claude would most likely get those numbers wrong because it's just not equipped to sort of take that data science or math work that I'm asking it to do and do it with a different set of tools than it's using the LLM that it's using to process the text. That's where ChatGPT is kind of a step ahead right now, in that it knows if you ask it a math question or a data science question, that it needs to go get a different tool to do that than the LLM that it uses to parse the text and generate responses. So, this is an evolving space, but what I think is important about ChatGPT is that it does show you, it gives you enough information to validate its results on these kind of data science tests. So I think this one, again, as I was saying, these, LLMs are non-deterministic. So when we ran this previously, I got a paragraph that was, it wasn't actually that convincing. Like it didn't really put the spin on it that I wanted. And then, there's this reality that like fatalities did actually increase. So this first draft here did when I had done it before, the first number it reported was like, basically the fatalities increasing. And I said, that wasn't really like the spin that I was asking for. Can you try again? One way that you can go from here, once you've like accepted that these numbers are correct, or proven to yourself that they're correct, is to basically give it some editorial direction. What's nice is ChatGPT also queues up prompts based on what's happened so far. And so as I'm considering, like, what am I going to write in this report at the end of this grant? What do I want to emphasize? I probably don't care that much about the non-pedestrian accidents because, this is a complete streets program, and I'm more interested in what happens to the vulnerable road users. But maybe I do want to add something about the crash causes. Maybe there's something going on there that can add some richness to this. And so ChatGPT has already seen that there's a column in the data called crash causes, and I didn't ask about it. And so it's prompting me to ask about it. And so we get some response here. I'm not sure how this is useful, but it does, potentially provide some some other opportunities for us to hone our narrative. So let me just show. Okay. So this is what the first time I did this, it had reported everything as percentages. And that was actually making the trend look not so great. And so I had asked it, I've come up with this prompt previously to go from percentages to absolute numbers, because I knew that that would show the impact of in a sort of decline in pedestrian injuries. So yeah, the first, this is, it's hard to see because I can't show it to you, but when I had done this before, it was comparing the percent increase in fatalities to the percent decrease in pedestrian injuries. And what I wanted it to do is to go and contrast how we had reduced, 150 injuries, and it was 6 fatalities. So to provide some scale there, because I thought that would be a more convincing narrative. Let's just, for experimental purposes, say like we decide we want it to go the other way. So you can basically say, rewrite that paragraph. And this is the kind of thing that like the decisions that people make when they write data narratives, right? Is it the relative or the absolute change that, tells the clearest story or emphasizes the trends that we want to emphasize? And so it went back and it rewrote. So this is what it had spit out the first time when I did it before. And I was like, no good. Like, I don't want to emphasize the 10% growth in fatalities because I know it's a relatively small number of people very severely impacted, but it sort of outshone this much larger reduction in injuries. So, I think these are the kinds of decisions that people make when they're writing narratives and reports. And what this shows is that you can work with the tool to pull the data out that you need to generate the narratives that you want to generate. And then again, iterate through it. And again, this is like where doing it, once I've established confidence in its ability to do this data analysis, I can rerun it many, 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 many times and really hone in on the presentation that I want, rather than me having to go back into Excel and do these tabulations 6 times again, over and over and over. And then I think Pari mentioned this, ChatGPT will also generate charts for you. So these can be helpful as kind of, maybe they're charts that you insert in the report, maybe they're first drafts that you hand off to a designer. there's lots of different use cases there, but it can also just give you visually, some indication of what's going on. This is a little over the top, but this sort of highlights just how big the reduction in pedestrian fatalities has been over. Can you show the drop in pedestrian? Oops.
This is great. There have been a number of questions in the chat throughout today's session around data visualization. So hopefully for folks who have been able to stay on, this is helpful. And
So
Anthony,
again, I mean, this is
questions when you get to a good spot on this.
Yeah, no, we're done. That's all I wanted to show, Tina.
Okay. Well, and these are great, like for everyone who is still on, these are helpful to think about, again, for putting your grant application together, being able to leverage visualizations like this, that the tool is generating for you rather than having to create them yourself. Anthony, we have about 8 minutes left and we've gotten a couple questions. First is from Katie. Katie asked, what if you don't know what data elements are needed to calculate a particular result? So she gave the example of greenhouse gas emissions reduced. Would ChatGPT be able to gather that info from your narrative and calculate a correct statistic?
So if you had the written narrative and you wanted to compute something from that narrative?
Yeah, if you have, I think what she's saying is if you have data and you want to calculate something, but you don't know how to calculate it yourself, you don't know what the right formula is, I guess, can you ask a tool like ChatGPT to determine how to, and then to calculate that metric? That's
a great question. I don't know if I have a sort of general answer for that, other than, on a case-by-case basis. Okay. And what it's probably going to do is tell you to go look at something else or talk to an expert. Yeah, I think like the basic math stuff is getting much, much better. And it's because of this new approach of not trying to have the LLM doing it, but dispatching a tool. Mm-hmm. There are other AI chat tools like Wolfram, which are designed for mathematical analysis.
Oh, interesting.
And some of those features are starting to come into these, but that's yeah. I think I'd have to see the specific use case.
Okay. Well, Katie, if you want to reach out the specific use case, maybe that's something we can workshop in a future session, because I think there's interest in diving deeper on how to use Gen AI and data analysis. Anthony, we also have a question from Allison Pegg, who asks, do you find that the memory feature of ChatGPT is beneficial or damaging to your work? Allison can't decide if she should keep the memory cleared or if she should just learn how to utilize the tool better. Do you have a point of view on that?
Yeah, I'm reading that now. My experience, you don't tend to get like kind of cross-chat pollution. It will definitely use the current chat as context. And so starting new chats is pretty effective way to like clear that context. I haven't come across that particular problem. You may keep getting artifacts from the model itself reappearing, but that's really unavoidable. But you can ask it to disregard things that you don't want. That's helpful. But yeah, I think the general answer to the question is like sort of almost like training it like a kid. Like, okay, let's start over. Like, you have to go to school. To go to school, you have to pack your lunchbox. To pack your lunchbox, you have to do this. Like, that can be a really effective way of controlling the context that it's going to respond to.
That makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping us up at this point and say thank you to the nearly 90 of you who have been able to stay on for 90 minutes. I really hope you found this session valuable. Perry, in a moment, I'm going to invite you to share any last reflections that you have. But first, I do want to invite everybody to save the date for our next session. It will be Wednesday, October 30th. And based on the feedback we've received today, we're going to go back and think about how do we continue this discussion on this topic in that session. So more to come, but do save the date for October 30th. Gail, your feedback that this is more content than a training that you paid for is gold. Thank you, Gail. And that's a great opportunity to say thanks again to Perry, Anthony, and Helena for just sharing so much expertise and knowledge in a really engaging session. I want to remind everybody, we referenced earlier the winning applications content on the local infrastructure website, local infrastructure hub website. And there's a lot more on there. It's a great way to see upcoming events and to find great case studies on other funding proposals. So do check that out. With that, Perry, I want to invite you, any last reflections you want to share with the group before we sign off?
Oh, my last reflection is just what I started with. Experiment with it. Use your common sense. Don't ask it to just write the entire grant proposal for you, but figure out how it can be most helpful to you in getting your job done. And always remember, you're smarter than the machine.
Excellent. Anthony, how about you? Let's close us out with any reflections. I mean, we put you to work today with demoing sort of the different use cases. Anything you want to end us on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of very tough questions that have been raised by folks who have tried this before with grant writing, and I think those cautions should be high on everyone's mind. We're just starting to figure out how to do this. You saw from Streamline, they're building a product around it, and they're a couple steps ahead of where like we are, but they're still figuring out how to do it. And there's lots of other fellow travelers in this space. So I think, goes one baby step at a time, and validate and verify at every step.
All right. With those words of wisdom from both Perry and Anthony, thank you again to all of you who joined us for the entirety of this session. We hope you found it valuable. All of this information, as well as a summary, will be posted to the Local Infrastructure Hub website in the coming days, a recording and a written summary, so check that out. Until next time, take good care. Have a good one, everyone. Go experiment.